Thank you. Welcome. Very happy to kickstart what is a series of panels at Raisina over the next 3 days on all things technology policy, on cybersecurity, on AI policy, the flavor of the season, as it were. And I'm really happy that we were able to sort of bring together this very accomplished and diverse set of speakers to talk to us about what we're going to talk about. And you could probably say that for most Raisina dialogue panels. But what particularly pleases me is that this is also, in some respects, a curtain raiser to the broader theme of saṁskāra that is the overarching theme of the Raisina dialogue here. We are going to talk about digital saṁskāra, and unless you've already heard a spiel from someone about what saṁskāra is, it essentially refers to habituations or impressions of the mind that could be instinctive or it could also be learned that have driven human actions for a long period of time. And if that sounds familiar to you, it's because 1,000 years after it was first identified in Sanskrit texts, a group of researchers by the name of Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman wrote a blockbuster book called Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow, which revolutionized the field of behavioral science and heuristics, as we call it today. In short, we're talking about a blueprint for digital prosperity, or stability, if you want to call it, in these extremely turbulent times. And what we want to focus on is is there a blueprint for digital prosperity? And two, just as importantly, what is India's position in that blueprint? Where does India fit, for lack of a better word, in that blueprint, given all the things that are going on in the world, not just in terms of geopolitics that we're seeing sort of living, breathing in a sort of visceral way day to day, but also all of these tectonic transformations that are happening in technology. And we have a great panel to talk to us about this. I'm going to ask all the panelists to maybe take just a minute to introduce themselves and their work, and to also, to kick things off, tell us what is the most exciting thing, the exciting development that they have seen in recent times in their respective sectors. So, Sakshi, if I can start with you.
Thank you. So I'm Sakshi, part of the tech policy team based in San Diego in government affairs. I think it's a very interesting question. So, as Qualcomm, we work on designing semiconductors, designing the chips that go into from your phone to your automobile to your wearables now, or to your drones and robotics and so on. One of the things that you are seeing is, of course, that the chips that are going into the data centers, which are enabling the AI that you use in form of your ChatGPTs of the world. But one very interesting thing that is happening and is now probably going to be the future when we talk about AI is that ability to use AI on your phone without internet. So you can be on flight mode on your phone and still being able to use these generative AI use cases. And that becomes very important, in places where you have no connectivity, like in rural areas, where you need so much more support without having necessarily the connectivity. So I think that's pretty interesting and exciting.
Perfect. And we'll come to what you're essentially referring to as inference on the edge, right? Rishi?
So I'm Rishi Val, and I run the Bharat Gen team. And Bharat Gen is an unusual company in that we're building foundational models, sovereign foundational models, as a non-profit that is entirely government funded and housed inside an academic institute in partnership with some of the top academic institutes in India. So that's sort of the mission that we have at Bharat Gen. And some of the most interesting sort of signals that we're starting to see with this new age of AI is the possibility in terms of enabling access through AI, and then the opportunity to upskill with access to AI. And maybe we'll talk a little bit more about that through the panel.
Thanks, Rishi. Nicholas?
Yeah, hi, namaste. I actually work at the intersection of open source in AI. So I do some work in non-profit with a non-profit in France called QTI, which is by Eric Schmidt, Xavier Niel, and Rodolphe Sade. but I also do things on the for-profit side with an investment company called STEM AI, which I'm bringing to India. But I also have been really marked in the way I think by the Human Genome Project 25 years ago, which people forget, but was actually US funded, involved 20 labs across 6 countries, including China. And I think when I see saṁskāra, I see two things. I see actually scientists which have a natural in their DNA to collaborate. And I see actually countries like India, Europe, Canada, and the rest of the world, which have an incentive, to go and collaborate, to not necessarily be a junior partner of US or China, but actually go through strategic autonomy. And these regions clearly have the talent to do that. And all I do is around that. And the last thing I do, I'm also doing a game with two iconic talent here in India, Amish Tripathi and Amitabh Bachchan, because I think you cannot think about AI without thinking about the commons when it comes to data that trains these models. And I think there's a important work to do to actually digitize some of the wonderful Indic philosophy, including concepts like saṁskāra.
Thanks, Nicholas. And I think the point which I know you and Rishi were talking about when we were, in the back room, about engineers yearning really to do fundamental research in a ecosystem that has been perhaps over-commercialized and wanting to sort of get back to the roots. Thanks. Anirudh?
My name is Anirudh. I started a company called Digantara. We're a space tech company based out of India and US. We work on space traffic management and space domain awareness, to keep it very simple. What excites me the most, or what I find interesting that has happened in last couple of years, is the advent of space race. Space was predominantly government and government controlled and operated. To now, we have seen over 60% of satellites owned and operated by commercial entities. Just to give you some perspective, I think from 2020 to 2025, 2020 is when I started this company as a student. To now, I think we have over 17,000 satellites. When we started, we had just 2,000 satellites. Space race started in 1957. 1957 to 2020, we just had 2,000 active satellites in orbit. Just last 5 years changed it completely, just because access to space has become much simpler and cheaper. And this is something that we couldn't have foresaw in the past. That's primarily because of reusable rockets that we have at this point in time, that has reduced the launch cost down from $2 million to $2,000 per kilogram to launch anything to orbit.
Thanks, Anirudh. And I think I should say that, to me, the common theme of all the speakers, tying together the work of all the speakers today, is that they are in some respects betting on the house. I was joking with Sakshi that Qualcomm is the house. But in some respects, Rishi, Anirudh, and Nicholas are trying to invest in companies or I beg your pardon, ecosystems that are more than just their companies. That ecosystem may have to do with universities, may have to do with the conduction of basic research by other entities, non-profit entities, or in the case of Anirudh, who we just heard, it might be in the overall development of an ecosystem that ostensibly runs on a global public good or a global commons called space. So I'm going to start with you, Anirudh, because it feels like you picked the perfect time to start a space surveillance and intelligence company. Tell us about the trends that you're seeing from this conflict unfolding in the Middle East, perhaps, and how that is even, I know it's like, much time hasn't passed, so I appreciate that your thoughts may be raw on this, but even with the little benefit of hindsight that you have, what are the things that you are seeing moving in the space domain right now in relation to the conflict, and where do you think privatization of space and all the resources that you're talking about is headed after this conflict?
I can start from my journey standpoint. When I started this, I was a student when I started to do research around space surveillance in 2018. And 2020 is when I started this as a company out of the Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore. At that point in time, two questions that I had was how do I fund the prototype development of everything that we're doing? Second thing is, who do I sell this to? Because we were focusing purely on research and development of a system that primarily tracks objects in space, we were thinking more of it like an air traffic control, but for space. But then gradually we saw a lot of geopolitical instabilities across the world, started with Russia and Ukraine, when we saw a lot of patterns of satellites change over Ukraine during that war. That gave us an insight of how we can use the same technology for defense. We started as a commercial company, more or less space is dual use, but we primarily focused on commercial when we started. Now we have evolved as one of the defense primes in India and also in the US, working primarily towards surveillance and intelligence related applications. One example that I can give is when the war was happening between Russia and Ukraine, there were a lot of satellite patterns that were being changed, and any maneuver in space cannot happen in a fraction of minutes or seconds. It takes time, and it takes at least a week to plan a maneuver in best case and then execute that maneuver. So there is a pattern change that you can clearly recognize if something changes in the orbit. And this change can tell us that there is something that's happening on ground because of which satellites are being moved. The fundamental point being space was never a domain for warfare in the past. It was more towards enabling something for the society. To now, I think space has become one of the fourth operational domain for warfare, which includes the recent Middle Eastern conflict, where we saw that before the operation was conducted, US made a statement that the first thing that we focused on was cyber and space. We planned everything through cyber and space routes, and then we executed these operations. So what that says is space infrastructure is very fragile at this point in time. We have commercial satellites, we have government-owned satellites, we have military satellites, and there are not so much rules and regulations around space sector at this point in time. And these rules are made by nations, but space is a global good at this point in time where people are launching more and more satellites, and these satellites can only be launched by countries who can afford them to launch. And basically that puts us in a question where whoever launches it first wins the race or gets that particular spot. Given all of this that's happening, one of the macro trends that we've seen is space is now heavily militarized. So we started as a space sustainability company, and now we are dealing more space security, understanding satellite patterns. Also, we are seeing trends change where there are countries developing advanced weapons out of space. And these are kinetic weapons that can be used to strike another satellite. Everything around critical infrastructure today depends on space programs of different parts of the world. So I think from our journey standpoint, we've seen a lot of evolution on how people are using space. And with AI, a lot of things have taken accelerated development routes. That's primarily because AI today supports or cuts short a lot of process involved in satellite development. At the same time, we are seeing a lot of announcements around AI-based systems in space or data centers in space. And that is, again, something that the world is exploring. So today, every single thing that we see, be it the local infrastructure for AI, also depends on satellite and satellite programs that are already in space.
Thanks, Anirudh. I think what you say in relation to space is also true in some respects to the internet, where, I mean, less than 2%, I think, of the internet is now done through satellites. It's still through subsea cables. But there's overwhelming privatization, commercialization that you're seeing of the basic architecture underpinning the internet is exactly the same trend that you described in space. And I want to come back at a later time to what you think is the consequence of weaponizing these global public commons like the internet and so on. But Nicholas, tell us about your project with Amitabh Bachchan. I mean, this is I just sort of want to preface it by saying, this is, Anirudh was talking about a trend where there is this incredible optimism among founders towards working for the government and government-oriented goals such as defense and national security. Yesterday we were talking about, there was this India-US dialogue, and we were talking about a new generation of founders who are patriotic, who want to be seen as affiliated, not just as identified as an American company, but also affiliated with American national security or foreign policy goals. You, on the other hand, you're appealing directly to the people and saying that there is this sort of cultural sort of fragment that you're trying to unearth and bring it back into the digital age. So tell us more about that.
Yeah, and I think what happened here, and not too far from here, 2 years ago, Sam Altman was asked by a very prominent Indian VC, what should India do in frontier AI? And Sam Altman replied, it's hopeless, don't even try. And it's my job to tell that to you. And when you watch the video, there's no arrogance in Sam, there's no aggression. And I say it comes at it from actually what is the Marvel American hero universe. That it's the American heroes would have the best weapon, would protect you, would defend you, and that's part of culture. And that's in the US, but that's also in the rest of the world. And what I was interested in and what I noticed is you have wonderful heritage culture, including in India with the Itihas, which have wonderful heroes, philosophy, which are slightly different from Western philosophy. And my conviction, whether I said to my producer, we like it or not in the West, is the world is moving east. And these philosophy at a time of national identity politics are rising. These philosophy are going to be very valuable for all of us. And so we set out to do a video game which is actually inspired by the ETS with two iconic talent being Amish Tripathi and Amitabh Bachchan. But to finish as well, think about how information is going to be funneled. They're mainly going to be funneled through these AI models. And these AI models have something that is called the latent space, which is basically the weights, the training data, the algorithm, etc. And they're probability driven. That means that a kid in India asking an AI to actually draw for him a monster, he will not draw a Rakshas, which is a typical mythological Indian monster. It will draw a monster seen in the Western universe. And it's very important for India and for other nations and their culture and other regions in their culture to actually, go and feed the algorithm with data, which is these artifacts of products that we are creating with the Age of Bharat as a game, but also, fortunately for India, 20% of the world population and the rest of the world population, because it's at the quality that it is a global product like Hollywood does, that actually talk about it. And then you start to re-inject in what are going to be these AI funnels to knowledge and culture, with actually the multipolarity that we also want to see in geopolitics.
Thanks, Nicholas. Rishi, I want to sort of focus on the model and not the model of operation for BharatGen, which, to somebody who is trained in international relations, we are sort of, told early on that the model of scientific advancement in post-war United States, for example, to those who are, clued in on that, we had this seminal document by Vannevar Bush in who was in the White House at that time, talking about science being the endless frontier, and a model of advancement that was supported by industry, research labs, which were prominently based in the universities of America at that time, and of course the market. You seem to be embarking on a similar venture, working very closely with the Indian Institutes of Technology. I'm sure you're not the first company in any domain to sort of be the first to do this, but at least in the domain of AI, what are your lessons, in working with researchers who are concerned with basic science and fundamental research, and two, what have you observed vis-a-vis approaches from the past and approaches from today in terms of working with the IITs?
Yeah, that's a great question, and maybe I'll connect the dots with the previous comment, because when Sam was up here on stage talking about, roughly speaking, it was in Hindi, "Tumse nahi hoga," you won't be able to do it. Let us handle it. We'll take care of it for you. We had a small team that we were just building, and we were saying, hey, let's go build this foundational AI in India. And I think there's a lot to learn from the work that's happened in the top research institutes. But there's a lot of ways in which I think we have to think about ecosystems around the world that are also going to be different, right? So we have to invent new ways of doing things. In Bharatjan's case, we actually decided that in order to put together the talent pool that is needed to go after such an ambitious program, it wasn't enough to just partner with one institute, that we actually decided that we needed to partner with 9 different institutes around the country to be able to pool together the kind of talent and the labs that are needed. The other interesting thing about building AI in India is inherently all the work that we do has to be frugal. Frugal from the perspective of building, and frugal from the perspective of the people that we need to serve as well, right? And so we have to look at AI, not just in terms of what the frontier labs are doing globally, but what can we invent in terms of the AI that can serve the rest of the world as well. And again, I think there's one thing you have to be very careful about is the global narrative is you have to have sort of these trillion parameter models that are enormously expensive to build, and there's only a couple of countries in the world that can do it. And I think when you actually get into it, I think what we're finding is that there's actually an interesting cost performance curve, and there are many operating points on that cost performance curve, and we think that many countries in the world will be able to pick different points there and build their own AI. And I think that's critical, because if you examine the nature of AIs, that we're popularly using today, they speak like West Coast Americans. And I think that makes sense if you're West Coast American. But if you're sitting somewhere else in the world, you probably want an AI that understands not just your language, but your culture, right? And not just your culture, but your perspective as well. And so we really have to sort of deeply think about, get into the science of it, get into the research of how do you teach an AI to think from multiple perspectives? How do you embed a philosophy, a culture, perspectives into the underlying AI, right? And a lot of that work actually has to happen in cultures where this data is sparse. So if you go to crawl the internet and get all the data that you can, it's not going to be representatives of most of the world. And so those are the shared challenges, the shared opportunities that I can see for sort of the rest of the world to come together, collaborate, and build together.
Thanks, Rishi. As Sakshi, as the resident West Coast American, do you take offense? I'm just kidding. I tell my students at Ashoka that Qualcomm is a great example of how investment in basic research pays dividends. Because to those who are unfamiliar with not familiar with the story of Qualcomm, you had this guy, Irvin Jacobs, who built the underlying technology, which at that time was CDMA. And as everybody in the room probably knows, CDMA failed as a telecom technology. But Qualcomm's emphasis was on building, for lack of a better word, railroads or technology protocols that would then, and of course, chips that would underlie the transformations in technology that would happen later on over generations now. And so Qualcomm is an incredibly successful company because it bet on certain fundamental things. It seems to me now, from what you said initially at the start of this session, that you're betting on inference on the edge. Now, to me, following what Nicholas and Rishi said, if the world is thinking in terms of, or at least if some part of the world with deep pockets is thinking in terms of Sam Altman, frontier models will be built by us, why are you thinking about inference at the edge? Why are you thinking about the poor farmer? Why are you thinking about I ask who's where is the market incentive to it? And are you then pursuing something other than market incentives?
Yeah. Okay, let's start with first unpacking what inference essentially means. When we think about AI, right now, you can divide it in 2 parts. So it's your training and your inference. Training is essentially whatever is happening in terms of data sets in the cloud. But inference is the thinking part that is also right now partly happening in the cloud, but increasingly can also happen at the edge. When we say edge, we mean that it can happen at multiple devices, starting from your smartphone to your wearables and to your cars and whatnot. Now, why that is important is because, and how as Qualcomm, we have transitioned from doing just 5G chips or 6G chips now to AI, because we had that capability to be power efficient, to be cost effective, and which is very important for you to be able to deploy that AI onto these small devices. So why is inference important? Now, when you are sitting in a place where you have low connectivity, how do you access AI? You can build these amazing models, you will have access to these amazing models, but if there's no internet, you can't use it. What is the point of it then? And especially when you think about use cases of these farmers, or for that matter, we have partners who have deployed these in oil fields. Like they're using this video surveillance to do on-device inference, and they're able to see what's happening in their oil fields. So all of those become very important from the point of diffusion. And from Indian perspective, no matter where these technologies are developed, while it be US, Europe, India, or wherever, I think India still remains a very important market when it comes to diffusion, because this is where the scale that everybody sees. This is where your farmers are, this is where your education is, this is where your healthcare is. So it is not only just a test case, but also a business case for all companies.
Thanks. And I think
Sorry, can I make a point about this? Because you ask about where is the capital to come for these good purpose of using AI on the edge. The reality is DARPA has been a big funder of fundamental research and innovation. Where is the most interesting and the most capital being poured at the moment in edge AI? It's in defense. It's actually the Qualcomm chip and the chips actually on ISR drones and attack drones. HMGCC in the UK has actually said one of their 10 breakthrough technology they want to actually make an investment in is edge AI. So technology is neutral. It can be used for good or bad, purposes. If you think that killing people is a bad purpose, but I think it's and it's not defense. But I think the capital has often come from defense in this innovation, and will continue to come from defense in a number of these innovation, and then we can have good applications for them.
Thanks, Nicholas. I think. Yeah, and Sakshi answered it very eloquently to say that this is not just about doing good, it's about doing good in a way that's sustainable, because I think if I can paraphrase her final message, which is if you try and make this work in India, odds are that it will work in a large swath of the developing world, certainly in continents where it then becomes scalable, not just from a deployment perspective, but also from a market perspective. So which is, and so far we have focused on the nice stuff, but before we sort of hand it out to over to the audience, maybe for a couple of questions, we have roughly 15 minutes or so. The one thing that I would like for all of you to sort of weigh in is, which is also relevant to the international relations focus crowd that tends to sort of be the main sort of crowd at Raisina. This tension now that we see between the United States and China from a geopolitical perspective, but as manifestly sort of making its impact felt in the tech space. First of all, how are you navigating it as your company or the enterprise that you are sort of working with? And two, what do you see for your sector, positively or negatively, because some positive developments have come out of the Cold War and so on. What do you see as a critical development that is going to emerge out of this new tech Cold War between the US and China? Maybe you can start with Sakshi.
So sitting in the US, I think with the two major things that have happened in probably last few months is, one is Pax Silica signing, and the other is the AI export AI stack export that US wants to do. I think from both of the perspective, we are both excited and nervous. Excited in the sense that US initially, when they had launched this, that they want to export their stack, there was a lot of confusion around what does this mean, what's going to be allowed, and other countries have their national champions. What does that mean? How do we fit into all of this? I think over the period of last 2 months or so, I want to say there's come some clarity in the fact that there is a recognition within the government that there are national champions that exist in each of the countries that they want to work with, and we have to work with them while we want to still want to export our stack. So we are a foundation level player. We play at the chip level. So our goal is to, work with governments on all sides to see how we can include it. So that's on that. And on Pax Silica, I think it's obviously very new, and India's just joined it. So we're going to see how the synergies work out.
Yeah, and I think, there have been a number of conversations here where I've heard people from, not just from India, from other countries, say that you have an administration in the United States that applies a mercantilistic logic to some of these discussions on supply chains, but with the calculation that if you don't provide the technology, somebody else is going to, which to me seems like a different way from how the United States has traditionally thought about export control. So that perhaps might be one positive externality of this new tech Cold War. But Rishi?
Yeah, I think we're in at a very interesting sort of point where the thing that I'd say that we have to understand is there are going to be many ways. We're going to be presented with two ways, which is you're going to go with the American stack or you're going to go with the Chinese stack. And I think that's in my mind, that's a little bit of a false choice, and we have to create a third way. And it's not to say that that third way is at the exclusion of other ways, but it has to be a way that actually works for the rest of the world. And so, just like there'll be AI should come from private entities. There's going to be a viewpoint that no, AI should be entirely provided and regulated by the government. And then there's going to be sort of the Indian viewpoint, which perhaps is going to be around, what digital rails look like, or what a digital common looks like, or what the AI commons looks like. And I think we have to sort of in every area carefully choose the pathways that will work. And I think different countries will have different balances. And it's important to have native capabilities to be able to build that third choice. Otherwise, sort of like you'll be forced to align with one or the other. Yeah.
Well said. Nicholas, I know you have thoughts independently about the US-China, the geopolitical race, but I do want to focus on gaming because our reference so far has been Marvel, Western superheroes. But as you know, and as you've told us, China is making incredible advancements in gaming. Is there a culture war that is also happening alongside the geopolitical tech Cold War that you are now implicated in?
Yeah, I think culture defines ambition, and I think when, like India, you're the fourth largest economy in the world, going on to be the third largest economy in the world, you need to also invest in your culture. I don't think we should put the case of choosing between either China or the US. We should actually draw inspiration, understand the assets that we have, and go on the same road that China has gone and US before. I think talent is evenly distributed. What is not is actually skill and capital. So we need to create the construct that actually going to bring this skill and capital to this talent. That's what we're doing with our game. A game at that level of production value quality hasn't been done in India before. So it's a partnership between Europe and India. And we need to partner, like the Human Genome Project partner, like a number of, like EADS was created. I think actually EADS, the EU has got so much blame for a lot of the problems in Europe that I think EADS is probably more difficult to do. And I just hope that the moment we're at in terms of geopolitics and war will actually drive the necessity and the urgency to go back to some of the things that have created, really great project, either non-profit or for-profit. And I think we need to draw inspiration for the people that have gone on that journey and been successful on that journey, whether we're India, Europe, France, Germany, Canada. And I think that's what I want to do. And gaming, what I do in gaming, what I do in AI is always driven by the same thing. Talent is evenly distributed. Let's get that talent, the capital and the skill, and they will do wonderful things on the global scene.
I mean, if I can just follow up, there is of course, there's a lot of talk about India and the United States being natural allies and so on. And there's something at least to be said about a long and now reasonably long history of engagement between the peoples of both countries in a way that hasn't happened with China. So my question is, and the same also applies to a reasonable degree for Europe as well now. So you can conceivably imagine Western partners working with India, for example, to augment its gaming industry, plugging themselves into some of the culture, as you have, cultural narratives. But why would the Chinese be interested in this?
I mean, I think China is on a different model, even in AI. It's very different from OpenAI to be created and say we're going to do open source and open science, or Qtai to do we're going to do open science, knowing that they're going to compete on the world markets, with each other. China has 15% of the world population. It can back 5 labs and say, not only in terms of the product you're actually going to come out of that innovative research, you have a captive market. That's two very different ways of doing capitalism. I mean, some people will say that's capitalism. That's capitalism in your own market. And I think we have to see, the distinction. And so we need in India, in Europe, and the US, we need risk capital to be able to do the things that will give prosperity. There's a very good paper that came out a couple of years ago from Harvard. Open source, the countries that actually have major contribution in open source have actually the most thriving startup ecosystem, with purpose, with profits and with successes. So we need to redo the fundamentals that have got us to where we are, and not forget and not be just for profit in our approach to innovation in the future.
Got it. Anirudh, not only are you working in a sensitive sector, you are also, you have real skin. You have real skin in the game because you have an office in Colorado. How is this tech Cold War shaping things for you?
I think when we started itself, we had to make a choice of which side do we pick. And being a company based out of India, you have to make a choice, given India also works with Russia, also with the US. Whether do you want to go to a path where you want to also have access to Russian markets, which will bar us from working in the US. So for us, the total addressable market from day one is an intersection. When you draw a Venn diagram, it's an intersection of Indian partnered countries and US partnered countries. That's our total addressable market from day one. So with that in mind, we started an office in the US primarily because the sector that we work in inherently has a lot of restrictions, primarily because everything that we build is dual use in nature. It can be weaponized. So everything that we do in India, the IP and all the tech that we're building in India remains in India. We work with the Indian Armed Forces, intelligence agencies in India, primarily to support them with adversary satellite information at any given point in time. That's how we maintain sovereignty. In the US, there are several programs that has a lot of restrictions in place, given the nature of the programs that we're working on with the Pentagon or with Department of War, which requires us to hire US cleared nationals who primarily works on the foundation IP that we've given to that entity as a licensing, through a licensing mechanism. That's something that they have to build on top of it without, letting all these things transfer to the Indian entity back, because that's the nature of restriction. When it comes to the patterns, I would say...
and I want to ask, if it is in your brain, when you take a flight from the US to India, how do you keep it in your office in the United States?
No, I think when we started again between US and India, in the US, I am more or less just like a board member who can know what's happening in the entity.
So
but
it's more about institutional structures in place to prevent.
Yes. So there is a firewall between our Indian entity and the US entity. Everything that we develop in the US entity is pretty much different from the foundational IP that we have in India. But in India, we focus on few other sectors that are of high interest for the Indian defense. But from the trend standpoint, I think given all the changes that we've seen in geopolitics, be it tariffs, be it things around war that's happening in the Middle East, increasingly every country is focusing towards sovereign tech development, which includes Europe. Europe before was heavily dependent on the US. I think Germany increased its defense budget quite a lot. 3% of their GDP is what they spend on defense, in which they've allocated $35 billion out of 102 billion euros, 35 billion euros to space security. So that is a larger jump that we've seen in European ecosystem. Similarly, when you see from a space race standpoint, there is a commercial space race as well. Everybody wants to launch internet constellation. Starlink started the trend. Today, more than 60% of active satellite in orbit belongs to Starlink. Out of 16,000 satellites, 9,000 satellites belong to Starlink, and one company, SpaceX, controls all of internet satellites in orbit. Europe saw that as a threat when there was a conflict with Ukraine and Russia. So they're heavily investing in Eutelsat, which owns a company called OneWeb. where they want to build their own sovereign internet constellation. And this trend is applicable to everything across defense spectrum, which is why every country today is increasingly focused on building indigenized tech, controlling the IP within the country. And that is something that we've seen as an opportunity in India, where we don't have to compete with US anymore when we have to apply for tenders on certain areas where there are tech from the US that can be utilized in India.
Thanks. And I do have a final question to you on all of you on the whole sovereign AI bit, but maybe we can take a few questions from the audience. I think you're expected to maybe go to the mic on both sides, actually, if you're on that side of the room. Yeah.
Hello. Yeah. Excellent session. All panelists. Quick question for Rishi. We were talking about these two stacks that you talked about, right? The US versus China. It reminds me of the whole Apple versus Microsoft debate that we have had for last 30, 40 years. But we are trying to look at a third alternative, which could be, a Linux or something like that. So I mean, in that sense, if India is taking, I won't say a lead, but actively involved with it, given the audience here, what kind of collaboration you're expecting from other countries other than US and China in terms of working with you, working with BharatGen, working with some of the top institutes in India like IIT Bombay on projects like these? And do you have some examples of that? Thanks.
Thanks, Amit. Rishi, will you hold on to Amit's question and then we can take maybe if there are more questions. Yeah, the gentleman.
Yeah, hi. I have a question for Anirudh and Nicholas. India faces challenges when it comes to the talent density, especially when it comes to the deep tech talent. How have you seen?
Could you be a bit louder, please?
India faces challenge when it comes to talent density, especially when it comes to deep tech talent. How have you seen this changing in the recent past?
Thanks. Is there any question? Yeah, please.
Hello. Am I audible? Yes. Hi, I'm Ankita and I work in a semicon giant in the Netherlands. I have a question for you, particularly Sakshi. Thank you for your insights. The US has its own AI governance laws. To a certain extent, the European Union has over-regulation in terms of governance in AI. India is at the moment under-regulated, I would say. What kind of thoughts do you have on governance around AI, especially with edge interference coming in India? Thank you.
Great. Any other questions? Because my job has been now made easy. Each panelist has a question assigned to them. Sakshi, let's start with you. The question on regulation, over, under, where are we?
I think given that AI is so fast-paced, it's hard to formulate the right governance structure or regulation just yet. The right approach kind of is, okay, so one of the things that can happen is through industry-led, guidelines or standards that are put in place that makes all the AI use cases that we are seeing a little more safer and secure for the consumers. And one of the things that is happening is something called, there's this industry consortium-led organization called ML Commons. And what essentially they're doing is they're doing benchmarking. They're making the LLMs or the tech solutions, AI solutions that are being made are safe and are not harmful for the consumers. So that in a way is like some sort of self-regulation that is already happening. And I think as we kind of see the use cases and how it's being implemented, we will see more and more government-led solutions also coming in.
Thanks, Ashi. Rishi, question on who else apart from the US and China?
Yeah, no, I think that's very relevant to our times, and maybe I'll connect the dots with the recent AI summit. I think prior to this, the last couple of years, the only really coming together of folks in AI tended to be at some of these industry conferences. Like we'd get together at NVIDIA's GTC, right? And we'd all sort of talk AI, and that was a great place to network. But this year, the AI summit in Delhi became an amazing opportunity for the other builders to come together. And what was really interesting for me, one of the most interesting events was actually an off-site event where some of the AI Alliance folks came together, and Jan LeCun was there too, and some of the prominent researchers across the the country and the rest of the world. And there was sort of an emerging consensus that we need to look at other ways to build AI. We need to look at other ways of collaborating, partnering, looking at data, looking at infrastructure to, there's a lot of software layers that we need to look at in order to enable this. And so it was very interesting to see this emerging consensus to say, how can we create groups of people who are sort of have a shared view? How can we do more of this work in the open? And I think that's the big opportunity in front of us, is to actually open up, to open up and be able to allow many more people to come in and participate. And I don't just mean open weights, and we were just talking about this in the back room, right? Open weights models are closer to EXCs, right? If you want to have open source, we're going to have to go a lot deeper into the actual recipes, the data mixing, sort of the black art of model building, and create more and more forums for us to share this work with each other.
Thanks, Rishi. Nicholas and Anirudh, a minute each for your concluding thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, on the question of the talent density in scientists is there in India. Google is one of the biggest employer. OpenAI is opening an office. Anthropic is opening an office. Same thing happened, to France. Yann Lequin decided to open FAIR in Paris. Google Brain was one of the best labs. We need to be a bit more subtle about, this sovereignty. People who have the skill that come to your country to develop the talent is a positive. We need, as a Frenchman, we need to go back, to what de Gaulle did. De Gaulle didn't say, I'm not going to speak to the US, I'm not going to engage with the US. He said, I'm going to make sure I have strategic autonomy and still engage in an alliance that is actually healthy. Actually, the Deputy Secretary of State almost encouraged that. He says, we don't want to be alone. So how are you not alone? We have to develop in each of these regions our own capability. And that doesn't mean not engaging, with the US. So I think we could do both, and we need to do both.
Thanks. Anirudh?
Since we started from the university, I think one of the things that we're doing is investing back into universities here in India and building certain niche talent that we would want. For example, the area that we work on is called astrodynamics, which is studying behavior of objects in space. This is something that is not taught as subjects in Indian universities. So we work with very specialized universities like Indian Institute of Space Technology, Indian Institute of Science, where we work with these students, professors, and nurturing this talent. That's one way of looking at things. The second is we've got a lot of talent from ISRO. And the third thing I think is the immigration policy that's helping us actually build a better talent pool in India. People are coming back from Europe, back from the US, who are contributing to a lot of things that are happening here in India. Maybe one last point that I missed in the previous question that I would want to leave the audience with. So within space sector, when we think of space, it's just about rockets, satellites. But I think the time has come where countries like US, China are really in the race where they're looking for the moon. And there are companies today building lunar logistics programs, and they're public listed. And I never thought that a company which would just do lunar missions will be public listed at this point in time. And that's one race that's already on at this point in time. And we are working towards building sensors to track everything that happens between Earth and the moon. That's called cislunar tracking. This is one thing that I want.
And even more worrying that some chap who's trading on Robinhood or Zerodha can control what's happening on the moon. But this has been an excellent session. Thank you so much to you, first of all, for joining us in what can be, what can only be considered an intense session after lunch. But hopefully we've left some fragments of thinking for you to consider what could be a blueprint for digital prosperity and stability, and to where India could potentially play a role. But for now, please join your hands for this amazing set of panelists, and over to my ORF colleagues.
Request all the panelists to come ahead for a photo op. Thank you.